Chicago. Downtown bus stop near Millennium Park. The worst blizzard in 20 years had transformed the city into a frozen battlefield, where wealth and poverty collided under the same merciless white. Emma Harrison, 7 years old, daughter of pharmaceutical executive Rebecca Harrison, worth $200 million, slipped away from her nanny to approach a figure huddled against the bus shelter. Marcus Thompson, 35, a former Marine and firefighter, sat with worn boots and a tattered military jacket, clutching a cardboard sign that read, "Will work for food." The child handed him her lunch bag and spoke words that would shatter two worlds. "You need a home, and I need a daddy. Mommy has lots of empty rooms, and an even emptier heart since Daddy went to heaven." Rebecca, witnessing the scene, saw in this homeless veteran's eyes not despair, but a dignity that trauma couldn't erase. What she discovered next, a war hero destroyed by PTSD and a corrupt VA system, would not only transform 3 lives, but shake Chicago's elite to its core. The blizzard had paralyzed Chicago in a way that made social boundaries visible yet meaningless under nature's indifference. Rebecca Harrison had just picked up Emma from the prestigious Lincoln Park Academy when the moment arrived that would rewrite their destiny. The child possessed an intuition beyond her years, perhaps sharpened by losing her father to cancer 18 months earlier. She escaped the nanny's grasp and ran toward the bus stop, drawn not by public transportation, but by a human soul reduced to survival's bare essentials. Marcus Thompson embodied everything America promised its heroes and failed to deliver. Decorated Marine, firefighter who'd saved 17 lives, now homeless on Michigan Avenue. His hands, once steady enough to carry children from burning buildings, now trembled from cold and withdrawal from PTSD medications he could no longer afford. The cardboard sign beside him told a story in 5 words that volumes couldn't capture. Emma stopped before him with the fearlessness only children possess, opened her designer backpack, and placed her organic lunch beside the man. Their eyes met in a moment of recognition that transcended circumstance. Emma saw past the dirt and despair to something her child's heart recognized as good. Marcus saw in the girl's blue eyes the same shade as his daughter's. The daughter who'd died in the house fire he couldn't prevent while deployed in Afghanistan. The child's words rang through the frozen air with prophetic clarity as she wrapped her cashmere scarf around his neck. Rebecca approached slowly, her Burberry coat a stark contrast to the scene unfolding. The story Marcus told in fragments, interrupted by shame and the difficulty of articulating trauma, painted a portrait of systemic betrayal. 3 tours in Afghanistan, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, returned to firefighting in Chicago. The house fire that claimed his family while he saved strangers. The PTSD that followed. The VA that denied his claims. The job lost to panic attacks. The apartment lost to medical bills. The streets that became home 6 months ago. Rebecca made a decision that would scandalize her Gold Coast social circle. She called her driver and ordered the guest wing of their Lakeshore Drive penthouse prepared. Marcus protested with the remnants of his pride, but Emma had already orchestrated everything, taking his weathered hand in her small left one and her mother's manicured hand in her right, joining them in a gesture that brooked no argument. The ride in the Tesla to Lakeshore Drive presented a study in contrasts. Marcus's worn boots on heated leather seats, Emma chattering about her plans for a new family, Rebecca watching in the mirror this broken man who still maintained military posture despite everything. When Marcus collapsed from malnutrition and hypothermia upon entering the penthouse, Rebecca carried him to the guest room with a strength born of desperation she hadn't felt since her husband's final days. The private physician, summoned urgently, diagnosed what Rebecca had suspected: severe malnutrition, untreated PTSD, signs of recent assault. Someone had beaten him for the few dollars he'd collected. The cold fury that rose in Rebecca hadn't been felt since watching cancer take her husband. But Emma voiced what all were thinking, calling Marcus a fallen hero who needed them to help him stand again. That first night, while Marcus slept safely for the first time in months, Rebecca sat by the fireplace with Emma asleep in her arms. The child's words from the bus stop echoed in her mind. Since David's death from pancreatic cancer, she'd armored her heart, focusing only on work and Emma. But this broken veteran had cracked the wall she'd built, letting in light she'd forgotten existed. Marcus's awakening in the Harrison penthouse guest suite felt like surfacing from a nightmare into an impossible dream. The contrast between the luxury surrounding him and the months of concrete and cold created a dissonance that disoriented him. But Emma's cheerful knock with breakfast anchored him to this miraculous reality. Over the following days, as Marcus regained physical strength, his complete story emerged like a mosaic of honor and betrayal. Son of a steel worker from Gary, Indiana, he'd joined the Marines at 18, seeking purpose and education. 3 deployments, countless missions, brotherhood forged in fire. The return home to become a firefighter, following his father's footsteps. Marriage to Sarah, birth of little Grace, a life rebuilding. Then the call that shattered everything. While he was pulling victims from a warehouse fire, his own home burned. Faulty wiring the landlord had ignored despite complaints. Sarah and 3-year-old Grace died while he saved strangers. The guilt and trauma broke something fundamental. The VA labeled his PTSD non-service related, despite 3 combat tours. The medication stopped. The panic attacks started. The department put him on leave, then let him go. Savings evaporated on funeral costs and therapy the VA wouldn't cover. Rebecca listened with growing rage at a system that abandoned its heroes. She knew people on hospital boards, had connections in Washington. But more than that, she watched how Marcus interacted with Emma, filling a paternal void with unexpected grace. He helped with homework using military precision, taught her about courage through sanitized war stories, showed her card tricks learned in barracks. The transformation was mutual. Emma, who'd had nightmares since her father's death, now slept peacefully. She laughed more, smiled with the spontaneity she'd lost. The penthouse staff noticed how the child gravitated toward Marcus, how he knew instinctively when she needed encouragement or space. The turning point came when Emma fell seriously ill with pneumonia. Marcus transformed into a guardian force, staying by her bedside for 3 days, using field medicine knowledge to supplement the doctor's care. Rebecca found him at 4 in the morning, singing the same lullaby David used to sing, a song Emma must have taught him during their afternoon talks. It was then, watching Marcus tend to her daughter with paternal devotion, that Rebecca understood she'd fallen in love, not from gratitude or proximity, but recognition of a kindred soul who'd known loss and transformed it into protective love rather than bitterness. The private investigator Rebecca hired discreetly returned with information that both vindicated and enraged. Marcus's VA claims had been denied by an administrator later convicted of fraud. His landlord had multiple violations that were covered up through bribes. Other veterans from his unit confirmed his heroism, his trauma, his abandonment by the system. Rebecca now had ammunition for war against those who'd failed Marcus. The battle began with surgical precision. Rebecca didn't seek emotional revenge, but systematic justice. First, media contacts received documentation of VA corruption. Then, political pressure through her pharmaceutical company's lobbying arm. Finally, coordinated legal action with other affected veterans, protected by anonymity. The press conference at the Drake Hotel became a watershed moment in Chicago's treatment of homeless veterans. Rebecca spoke not just as a powerful executive, but as a widow who'd seen the system fail twice. First with her husband's delayed cancer diagnosis due to insurance battles, then with Marcus, a hero discarded like trash. The exposure of VA Administrator James Crawford's corruption was methodical and devastating. 5 veterans' testimonies, verified and documented, painted a picture of systematic denial of benefits to increase his performance bonuses. Marcus sat in the front row with Emma holding his hand, tears flowing silently as truth finally emerged into light. The domino effect was immediate. Crawford was arrested, then indicted. Other veterans found courage to speak up about denied claims and corrupted processes. A wave of reform swept through not just Chicago's VA, but triggered national investigations. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs personally apologized to Marcus, approving full benefits retroactively and offering him a position helping other veterans navigate the system. But while the outside world applauded this victory for justice, a more intimate drama unfolded in the Lake Shore Drive penthouse. The attraction between Rebecca and Marcus had become impossible to ignore. Dinners had evolved into deep conversations about loss, trauma, resilience. Rebecca discovered a well-read man who quoted philosophy learned in bunkers, while Marcus found a woman whose corporate armor hid profound empathy. Emma, with a child's clarity, catalyzed the inevitable. During dinner, watching the adults exchange glances they thought went unnoticed, she posed the question everyone avoided. Her logic was unassailable. They loved each other. They were happy together. She needed a father. The emotional mathematics of a 7-year-old cut through all social complications. The conversation that followed that evening, after Emma was asleep, took place in the living room, with Chicago's skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus confessed his love, but also his fears. The social gulf, the debt of gratitude, the fear of being seen as taking advantage. Rebecca silenced him with a kiss that communicated what words couldn't, followed by her own confession about mutual salvation. But Chicago's elite weren't ready for this modern fairy tale. When news of the relationship leaked, attacks were swift and vicious.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Tabloids published photos of Marcus from his homeless months with cruel precision. Rebecca's mother, a Gold Coast matriarch, summoned Marcus for a meeting designed to humiliate. The offer of $1 million to disappear was refused with a dignity that surprised even the formidable Mrs. Harrison. The decisive moment came during Christmas dinner at the grandmother's mansion. Emma, with the courage children possess when defending truth, stood before the assembled family and delivered a speech that left everyone speechless. She spoke of Daddy in heaven sending Marcus, of love that couldn't be bought, of her choice to stand with Marcus, even if the world stood against them. The child then took Marcus's hand and led him from the table, followed by Rebecca. The message was clear. Their family against the world, if necessary. The choice was made and admitted no compromise. The new year brought storms that tested this nascent family's foundation. Marcus's estranged father, Bill Thompson, appeared with a lawyer threatening to expose embarrassing information unless he received $5 million. The blackmail was vicious. He threatened to reveal Marcus's suicide attempt during his homeless months, painting him as mentally unstable. The situation exploded when Crawford, out on bail, orchestrated revenge from the shadows. Authentic but decontextualized photos of Marcus during his homeless period surfaced, digging through garbage, sleeping in the subway, accepting $20 from a woman in an alley. Tabloids erupted with cruel headlines implying prostitution. Marcus packed his few belongings to leave, convinced he needed to protect Emma and Rebecca from this mud. But when he tried to slip away at dawn, he found Emma sitting on the stairs with her own suitcase, determined to follow him anywhere. The scene that followed, the child refusing to let Marcus leave, Rebecca tearing up his goodbye letters, cemented their bonds permanently. Rebecca responded with a brilliant media counteroffensive. Instead of defending, she attacked the system that allowed heroes like Marcus to end up on streets. She showed statistics of homeless veterans with advanced degrees, the failure of support systems, society's hypocrisy in judging victims rather than helping them. The announcement of the David and Marcus Foundation, with an initial endowment of $20 million, transformed the narrative from scandal to inspiration. But the hardest blow was yet to come. At a hospital gala, Crawford appeared and publicly revealed the final secret. Marcus had lost a child in that fire, not just his wife. The complete emotional collapse of Marcus was total, but Rebecca lifted him in her arms and carried him out before all of Chicago, in a gesture that became symbolic of absolute protection. That night, while Marcus wept for the grief never properly processed, Rebecca and Emma surrounded him with love that demanded nothing in return. Emma, with wisdom impossible for her age, spoke of Grace as an angel watching over them, the reason they'd found each other. Her simple words began the healing process Marcus had never been able to face alone. Crawford's trial became the year's biggest case. Marcus testified with courage, supported daily by Rebecca and Emma's presence in the front row. When the 15-year sentence was pronounced, Marcus didn't celebrate. He simply turned to his new family and whispered they could finally begin to truly live. Rebecca's marriage proposal came that very evening, spontaneous and perfect in its simplicity. Not on one knee with a fairy tale ring, but sitting all three on the couch, with Emma bouncing with joy, having already planned every detail of her flower girl dress. The engagement announcement triggered a war that divided Chicago into two camps. Old guard high society saw the union as an unforgivable scandal, while a new generation read it as a love story transcending social barriers. Rebecca's mother intensified her opposition with concrete threats: disinheritance, removal from the company board, even a legal battle for Emma's custody, citing the inappropriate environment. The ultimatum was brutal in its simplicity: Marcus or the empire. Rebecca didn't hesitate. Before the emergency board meeting, she submitted her resignation with words that would become legendary in Chicago business circles. She'd already lost a husband to the altar of success. She wouldn't lose love a second time for money she couldn't take to the grave. But Marcus couldn't accept Rebecca sacrificing everything for him. The internal conflict tormented him. How could he be the cause of the woman he loved losing everything? The answer came from unexpected support from key employees who threatened mass resignation, and longtime clients who declared loyalty to Rebecca, not the company. Within 48 hours, old Mrs. Harrison had to yield. The most dramatic twist came when 10 veterans, inspired by Marcus's story, came forward with their own testimonies of VA abuse and societal abandonment. Marcus had involuntarily become a symbol, and his story had opened a Pandora's box no one could close again. Public opinion shifted decisively in their favor. During Crawford's trial, every hearing saw the courtroom packed with supporters. When Marcus testified, the silence was so complete you could hear only the court reporter's keys. His dignity in recounting horrors endured, his insistence on systemic change rather than demonization, won over even skeptics. But it was Emma's testimony that proved decisive in public opinion. The child, asked about the period when Marcus entered their lives, described in simple words how sadness had vanished from their home, how Mommy smiled again, how she'd found a daddy. No rhetoric, just a child's truth about love conquering prejudice. Crawford's conviction, 15 years for fraud and corruption, was met with applause in the courtroom. But Marcus didn't celebrate. He simply turned to Rebecca and Emma and said they could now build their future without shadows. The wedding was set for spring, not at the cathedral as Chicago society expected, but at a small church in Gary, Indiana, the working-class town where Marcus grew up. A powerful symbolic gesture. Don't forget origins. Don't deny the past. Build the future on authenticity. The wedding day saw Chicago wake to spring sunshine that seemed to bless the impossible union. The small Baptist church in Gary overflowed not with celebrities and cameras, but real people. Veterans Marcus had helped, medical colleagues who'd supported Rebecca, loyal employees, and especially Emma, radiant in her role as flower girl and emotional architect of this union. Marcus walked to the altar in his marine dress blues, medals gleaming. Rebecca approached in her mother's simple wedding dress, having refused designer extravagance. But it was Emma who stole the show, scattering rose petals with the solemnity of someone completing a sacred mission. The most touching moment came when Rebecca's mother stood during the ceremony. Everyone held their breath, fearing last-minute opposition. But the woman approached Marcus and, with a broken voice, asked forgiveness. She'd seen true love, understood that David would have been happy. She handed him David's wedding ring to wear on his right hand, a gesture of acceptance that brought tears to everyone. Emma read a letter she'd written about broken families becoming whole, angels sending other angels, children's hearts knowing things adults forget. There wasn't a dry eye in the church when she concluded, saying they were now complete. A year later, the Lakeshore Drive penthouse hosted another celebration. Rebecca was pregnant with twins, and Emma was ecstatic about becoming a double big sister. The pregnancy was difficult. Marcus's genetics carried complications. Rebecca's age added risks. But Emma transformed into Rebecca's little assistant, creating an even deeper bond. The twins, David Jr. and Grace, were born on a November night, almost exactly a year after the bus stop meeting. When Marcus held them for the first time, with Emma stroking their tiny heads and Rebecca smiling exhausted but radiant, the circle closed. The impossible family had become reality. The David and Marcus Foundation had meanwhile become a national model. 3 shelter facilities, dozens of scholarships, hundreds of veterans rescued from the streets. Marcus divided his time between the VA office, where he'd become a respected advocate, and the foundation, where his lived experience made the difference. 5 years after that day at the bus stop, the family had grown again. A 4th child was on the way. Emma was a wise preteen who spoke of opening centers worldwide to unite lonely children and lonely parents. During an ordinary dinner, with the twins making a mess and Emma helping, the family seemed painted by an artist of extraordinary normalcy. The framed photo in the hallway captured the initial moment. Marcus huddled in the snow, Emma handing him lunch, Rebecca in the background. Below, Emma's childish handwriting from then, the day our family began. That evening, as snow began falling again on Chicago, Rebecca looked from the window at the bus stop where everything had started. Marcus embraced her from behind while the children slept. No words were needed to express the miracle they lived daily. Emma, now a teenager, had added extra figures to the family nativity scene. A soldier who'd lost his way, a child reaching out her hand, a woman opening her home. Because miracles, she'd understood, don't descend from heaven fully formed. They're born from simple acts of compassion, from children who see beyond appearances, from adults who find courage to love beyond conventions. The foundation has now saved over 1,000 veterans. Marcus is a nationally recognized advocate for veteran affairs. Rebecca has transformed her company into a model of social enterprise. But when people ask Emma about her greatest achievement, she always responds the same way, with the simplicity that changed everything. She'd found a daddy for herself and a home for Marcus. And in that disarming simplicity lies all love's truth. It doesn't calculate, doesn't measure, doesn't discriminate. It sees a soul in need and another that can give, and unites them, even if one is homeless in the snow and the other travels in a Tesla. Because in the end, as a 7-year-old understood, we all seek the same thing. Someone to say, "You need a home, and I need you." The miracle wasn't the meeting. The miracle was the courage to transform that meeting into family, to choose love beyond all social logic, to believe a child could see more clearly than all adults blinded by convention. The bus stop near Millennium Park still stands, silent witness that a child's act of compassion can rewrite entire destinies. And every winter, when snow falls on Chicago, the Harrison Thompson family remembers that the most beautiful gifts sometimes arrive in worn military boots, waiting for a child's heart to recognize them. Hit like if you believe children see love more clearly than adults. Comment with the moment that touched your heart most. Share with those who need to know it's never too late to start over. Subscribe for more stories proving that one act of kindness can change entire destinies.